Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of Book 2 of the Chronicles. We are up to chapter 30, so that is Divrei Hayamim Bet Perek Lamed. And we just read of Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah's first major act as king to restore the temple, to cleanse it of all of the abominations that his father had placed there. Chizkiyahu began his career by bringing the people back to the temple, and we left at the time when it was the holiday of Passover, Pesach, and they had just completed restoring the temple. So Chizkiyahu, one of his first orders of business, of course, is to celebrate Passover. But they're in a bit of a bind because they kind of missed the boat. Because remember, it was the 16th day of when the Passover has already been a day before that. So they kind of missed the boat. They weren't able to get it all done in time. So we're about to learn how he worked around that. So Vayishlachi Chizkiyahu al Kol Yisrael. So Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah, then sent to all of Israel, Yehuda and Judah. Now, this is interesting because the kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel, is gone now. During the days of Achaz, Chizkiyahu's father, that was when the Assyrians completely conquered and destroyed the northern kingdom. So there was no more northern kingdom. And many of them were exiled to various parts of the Assyrian Empire. But what we learn from here is that many of them stayed and remained in, many of the residents of Israel stayed and remained, and continued on. Some of whom rejoined the people of Judah, their cousins to the south, the members of Judah. So so the exile of the people of Israel was a small percentage. Most likely it was the leadership and the nobles, the ones who were most likely to launch a revolution against Assyria. The Assyrians exiled them. And we see that pattern later on in the destruction of Judah by the Babylonians, that this was a common practice. They didn't exile everyone and make the entire land desolate. They took the leadership, the military leadership, the ones who were the resistance to the empire, but the general public just stayed and remained, so that the land would not be completely depopulated and become desolate. And also, there needs to be people to work the land to bring wealth back to the empire. So in Chizkiyahu's time, we also read, he also, Igros, sent letters, Kosav al Ephraim u'Menashe, to the people of Ephraim and Menashe, those being the prominent tribes of the 10 northern tribes. So he's writing letters to those that remained there, Lavo Leveit Adonai, that they should join. Now their own centers of worship are gone. Their central command, their kings are gone, right? But come join your brothers here in Judah. Come to the temple of God, to Jerusalem, Lasos, Pesach, in order to celebrate the holiday of Passover, Ladonai Elohei Yisrael, in honor of God, the God of Israel. All of us are together on this. So come. Vayivoatz HaMelech V'Sorov. And the king took counsel with his leadership and the officers, v'chol hakahol, and all of the congregation, b'Yerushalayim and Jerusalem, and the decision was made, lasos haPesach b'chodesh hasheni, instead of doing the Pesach in the first month, to do, as we know from the Torah, when the people are not yet capable of bringing the first Pesach because they are impure, right? So then they have a second chance in the month of Iyar, in the second month, to do Pesach then. So therefore, the decision was made to celebrate Pesach this year. Everyone should celebrate in the second month rather than the first month. So this was his workaround. Because they were not able to do it at that time. Because the Kohanim, the priests, had not yet completely sanctified themselves, and the nation had not yet come to Jerusalem. Vayishar hadavar b'nei hamelach, and the king felt this was a good idea, uve'nei kol ha'kahal, and in the eyes of all the congregation, that this year they should do it in the next month. Vayamidu davar lahavir kol b'chol Yisrael, and they established and they set out a decree to proclaim throughout an announcement throughout all of Israel, from Beersheba v'Adan, from all the way in the south in Beersheba to Dan, all the way in the north, Lavo, that everyone should come lasos Pesach, to bring the Korban Pesach, to bring the Passover sacrifice, L'Adonai Elohei Yisrael b'Yerushalayim, to God the Lord of Israel in Jerusalem, Kilo larov asu kakasov, because it hasn't often been that the people had done as is written in the Torah they're supposed to. In other words, Passover hadn't been celebrated properly for quite some time. Vayelchu haratzim ba'igros miyad hamelach v'sarav b'chol Yisrael v'Yehuda, and the runners, meaning the and people in charge of bringing the announcements and traveling throughout the land to bring the message, went with letters from the hand of the king that are written by the king V'sarav and his officers, B'chol Yisrael. They spread out through all of Israel, V'Yehuda, and all of Judah, Uchemitzvas HaMelech, as the king had commanded, Lamar, saying the following: B'nei Yisrael, children of Israel, Shuvu el Adonai Elohei Abraham Yitzchak V'Yisrael, return to God, the Lord of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, V'yashov el HaPleita, and he will return to those that remain, Hanisheres Lachem, those that remain, Mikaf Malchei Ashur, from under the boot, or literally under the hands of the kings of Assyria. In other words, all of you have suffered so much, right? Both Judah and Israel by this point had already suffered numerous assaults from Assyria, as we read about during the time of King Achaz. So much destruction had been wrought in the land, to the extent that the northern kingdom had completely been destroyed. The southern kingdom of Judah had been subdued significantly. Come and let's celebrate, let's rejoin, and God will rejoin us. And don't be like your fathers and like your brethren, asher mo'alu b'Adonai Elohei avosechem, that have rebelled against God, the Lord of their forefathers. Vayitneim l'shama, and he made them, placed them, set them for destruction. Kasher Tamarim, like you see, they rebelled against God. They went to worship the gods of the Assyrians and to worship and rebel against the ways that God had commanded us to do. And what was the result? They ended up being destroyed. Ata, now, al takshu arbchem, don't be stubborn, kavosechem, like your fathers. Tnu yad la'Adonai, give your, literally this translates to give your hand to God, meaning give support to the proper path of God. Uvo l'mikdashu, come to his temple. Asher hekdish li olam, he made his temple holy forever. It wasn't just meant for generations ago, it's for us now, it's forever. V'ivdu es Adonai Elohechem, and worship God, the Lord your God. V'yashov mikem charon apo, and his anger will turn away from you, and we will rebuild that covenant, we will rebuild that relationship. Ki v'shuvchem al Adonai achechem uvnechem l'rachamim lifnei shoveim. Because if you return to God, then your brothers and your children will then find mercy, right, from those who had captured them. In other words, he's saying this to the people, mostly of the north, but also of those towns in Judah, whose many of their family members had been taken captive. Don't you want to be reunited with your family members? If we return to God, then maybe God will have mercy, and the captors of our family members, our brothers and our children, will have mercy on them, and v'lashuv la'aretz hazos, and allow them to return to this land. Here we have the idea already of people that have been taken out to exile returning to the land of Israel. Ki chanun v'rachum Adonai Elohechem, because God is merciful and God is kind. V'lo yasir panim mekem, he will not turn his face from you. Im tashuvu elav, if you return to him. It's up to you. Return to God. He will return to you, and not only will he return to you, but he will return your family back to you. A very powerful message that King Hezekiah is sending around. And what was the response? The messengers were running from city to deliver this message, Be'eretz Ephraim, Menashe, V'ad Zevulun, all throughout the former northern kingdom of Israel. And for the most part, the reception that they got was being laughed at and mocked and despised. The reception was anything but a kind one, anything but a positive reception. However, it wasn't completely lost. There were some people from the tribe of Asher, the tribe of Menashe, the tribe of Zevulun, Nichneu, that subdued themselves, that were humble enough to recognize, our forefathers had followed a bad path. Look the way they went. Let's rejoin our people and live the way we were commanded to live and rebuild our covenant and agreement with our brothers in Judah, Vayavol Yerushalayim, and they came to Jerusalem. Gam Yehuda Haisa Yadhu Elohim Laseis Lem Lev Echad, and the hand of God, in other words, the influence, the godly of influence, was also found throughout Yehuda. So there were some among the northern tribes, and throughout Yehuda there also was Laseis Lem Lev Echad, to give them a unity of purpose, right? Lasos mitzvahs hamelach, to do as the king had commanded, v'yasarim, and his officers, bidvar Adonai, to keep the word of God. V'yasfu Yerushalayim amrav. So many people did gather in Jerusalem, not as much as Hezekiah had wanted, but many did. So it was a large success, but not a complete success. Lasos es chag hamatzos bechodesh hasheni, to celebrate the festival of Matzah, the festival of Passover in the second month, Kahal Larav Ma'od, a great, large congregation. Vayakumu, and they came, Vayasiru et hamizbachos asher b'Yerushalayim. We read of the purification of the temple, but now that this crowd of people were there worshiping God, they got rid of all of the altars in Jerusalem, V'eskol hamekatros hesiru, and all of those who were bringing incense to presumably other gods, Vayashlichol Nachal Kidron, and they were thrown into the Kidron Valley to dispose of them. Vayishchatu HaPesach bi'arba asar lachodesh hasheni, and they slaughtered the Paschal lamb, the Paschal sacrifice, on the 14th day of the second month. So this is about 1 month after the completion of the purification of the temple that we read about in the last chapter. V'akohanim v'halaviim nichlemu v'yiskadshu, and the priests and the Levites were ashamed, and they made themselves holy. They purified themselves by aviu olos beis Adonai, and they brought olos, sacrifices in the house of God. What does this mean they were ashamed? Remember, in the last chapter, we talked about how the Kohanim, especially the priests, many of them didn't show up for Hezekiah's original thing, and it took them a while to get off the ground this renewal of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple. They were ashamed that we're bringing the simple understanding is that they were ashamed of the fact that we're bringing the Korban Pesach. We're bringing it now, a month late. We had to do this. Why? Because we weren't ready before, and had everyone come, had everyone been more diligent about it, we probably could have had this done at its proper time in the first month. Ki rabat bakol asher lo iskadashu. There were many people, this is verse 17, that had not sanctified themselves. In other words, it was a great renewal, but nowhere near what it should have been and could have been. And in many cases, the Levites had to do the slaughtering to people who were not cleansed yet, in order to consecrate the animals to God. Especially of the people that came from the northern kingdom, from those tribes, Ephraim, Menashe, Yisachar, Zevulun, they had not purified themselves. They had eaten the Karban, the Pesach, not according to the way it is written properly, which is to be eaten in a state of holiness. Hezekiah basically made an a religious decision here, and that was, at least they're here celebrating, if they're not doing it properly, I mean, what could we do? These people have been lost for generations and generations, not keeping the Torah, not worshiping God as they were supposed to. They're here, okay, so they're not doing it properly, and Chizkiyahu prayed upon them that may God forgive us for doing this in not the exactly proper way. Kol livavo hechin, right? Lidroshu Elohim Adonai le'avosav v'lo kitar hakodesh. Everyone who has come, their brethren, they just made fun and they didn't even want to come. At least they showed up, right? So anyone who sets their heart and honestly tries and wants to worship God is welcome here, even if they're not doing it Kitar HaSakodesh, even if they're not doing it in the proper holy way. This is a tremendous lesson that Divrei Hayom, the chronicler, is trying to teach us, that sometimes you have to go a little beyond the letter of the law in order to bring people that mean well, that are trying to bring them close, right? Exactly the extent of this is, of course, topics is discussed in the Talmud and so on, but the general idea is the general idea that Chizkiyahu had to overlook a little bit of the law in order to bring these people's hearts back to God and to reunite them with the God of their forefathers and to reunite them with their brethren in Judah. Vayishma Adonai el Chizkiyahu vayirpas. And God heard Chizkiyahu. In other words, he agreed and understood that Chizkiyahu was doing what had to be done and healed the nation, which is a way of saying God forgave them for their transgression here. Vayasu b'nei Yisrael hanimtzim b'Yerushalayim es Chag HaMatzos Shivas Yamim, and they celebrated the festival of Matzah, the festival of Pesach, for 7 days, b'simcha gedola, with great joy, umahalalim l'Adonai, and they praised God yom b'yom, each of the 7 days, halavim v'akohanim b'chlei oz l'Adonai, the Levites and the priests with strong instruments, all in praise of God. Verse 22, Vayedaber Yechizkiyahu alev kol haLeviyim, and Yechizkiyahu spoke to and encouraged all of the Levites, hamaskilim seichel tov l'Adonai, those who skillfully, with great skill, played music for God. Vayochlu asamoid. So Yechizkiyahu gave them strength and courage and encouraged them and gave them a morale boost. Vayochlu asamoid shivas yamim, and they ate the festivals, sacrifices, and celebrated these festivals for 7 days. Mizabchim zivchei shlamim, they brought peace offerings, umisvadim, and they confessed l'Adonai le'avosechem, to the God, the Lord of their Havoseihem, the Lord of their forefathers. Vayivoatzu kol ha'kol asos shivas yomim acherim, and the joy was so great, and the accompanying celebrations and the closeness with God and the closeness with each other and the reuniting of the different tribes was so wonderful, they decided to do the Shivas Yomim Acherim for an extra 7 days. Vayasu Shivas Yomim Simcha, and they made an extra 7 days of holiday. Ki Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda Hirim LaKahal, King Chizkiyahu, he had donated for the congregation, Elef Parim, 1,000 cows, V'shivas alafim tzon, and 7,000 sheep. V'hashorim herimu, and the singers themselves donated l'alcohol to the congregation, Parim Elef, 1,000 cows, V'tzon, and sheep, Aseres alafim, 10,000, V'yiskachu kohanim l'rov, and many, many, many more priests that had not participated yet, sanctified themselves and rejoined their brethren, the priests, in the service in the temple. Vayismechu kol kahal Yehuda, and all of the congregation of Judah were so happy. V'akohanim v'alavim, and the priests and the Levites. V'chol hakol abam Yisrael, and all of the congregation that came from the northern kingdom, the remnants of the northern kingdom of Israel. V'hagerim, and those that were not members of the people of Israel, but those that lived among them, the resident aliens, sometimes translated, or people that either had converted or had joined the Jewish people, were living among them. Those that were living Eretz Yisrael, that came that from the land of Israel in the north, Vayoshim Yehuda, and those that resided in Judea. There were many that weren't maybe genetically or ethnically a part of Israel or Judah, but they lived there. They became part of the society, and they all celebrated together. V'atehi simcha gedola b'Yerushalayim, and there was a great happiness in Jerusalem. Ki mimei Shlomo ben David melech Yisrael lo chazos b'Yerushalayim. Such a celebration had not occurred since the days of King Solomon, the king of Israel, in Jerusalem. This hadn't happened since then. Verse 27 will conclude this wonderful description of this Passover. Vayakumu haKohanim haLeviyim, and the priests and the Levites, right, or the priests that came from the Levite tribe, because of course the priests are a subgroup of the Levite tribe. Vayavarchu et ha'am, and they blessed the nation. The great tradition of blessing of the Kohanim, of the priests, blessing the nation on the holiday of Passover. Vayishama b'kolam, and their sound of them blessing the nation was heard. Vatavot vilasam limaon kacho lashamayim, and their prayers went all the way up to God's great residence in heaven. This was the beautiful celebration of Passover led by King Hezekiah in the beginning of his reign. Hezekiah here bringing about a unity that had never been seen before, bringing back the priests who had abandoned their tasks, the Levites who had abandoned their tasks, getting rid of idol worship, bringing back the lost brethren from the tribes of the north that had just been completely smashed and tattered, and half of their families exiled, and the entire nation crushed under the Assyrians, bringing back hope, bringing back love, bringing back joy, song, worship to the people. This is the image of Hezekiah in the beginning of his reign, and the great, great promise which he brought to the Jewish people of the time. And we will see where this leads and the potential that this had, and unfortunately how it ultimately failed, and we will learn and understand why. But right now we are on a high, so let's enjoy the high. I look forward, of course, to studying chapter 31 and the rest of the book of Chronicles together. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you so much for participating in our learning together.